If I hit here, you'll get all three cameras, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
We ready?
Yep.
It's June 9th. We are in an undisclosed location. We are interrogating Jim Osterberg about the Stooges, the greatest rock and roll band ever.
You know, one of the things that amazes me is that they do not go about this in a show business way. For instance, when somebody says, here's an act, and they announce the act, they may very well tune up for 10 or 15 minutes before they ever play the first number that they're going to play. And the kids don't seem to mind this at all. They watch it all and listen to the tune-up and listen to them check speakers. And I think we've got some action coming up now. We'll leave Bob Waller for the moment and go to the stage and listen to Iggy and the Stooges.
Iggy right into the crowd. We lost audio on him.
Waller is down in the field with the crowd. I don't know just where, but we'll find him.
Riots in the Motor City.
It was tough. And we were stumbling and bumbling, and finally the record company didn't even bother to have anything to do with us, but we had agents and different managers who tried to see if they could penetrate the tangled web of our career, and most of them dropped out in horror. And we bumbled around America playing raggedly. We started looking dirtier and dirtier and skinnier and more used. And we're getting worse and worse. We're sinking fast into semi-oblivious gigs. Some people still liked us. Some gigs I could get it together to sing. Some I couldn't. Some gigs we'd show up on time. Some we didn't. Upsetting people usually because of me wherever we went.
The band was really deteriorating very rapidly at that point. So we went out and played some gigs and stuff, but all kinds of stuff happened. I mean, we had to play a job with Steve McKay on drums, which was really wild because, you know, Steve said he could play drums, but he couldn't. And so we needed the money so bad, we just let him play.
Oh, you want me to tell that story? Iggy would call a song and start doing it, and I'd start doing a beat, and he'd come back and grab the sticks out of my hand and go over to the floor tom, and he would beat the beat out. And then I would know what the beat was, and then I'd finish the song. And he did that with every single song. And the crowd's throwing bottles at him, and they're saying, "Come on, Iggy, let's see you puke, motherfucker. Fuck you. It's like, you know, giving him all the abuse.
Thank you very much to the person who threw this glass bottle at my head. It nearly killed me, but you missed again, so I have to keep trying next week.
Leading up to the Michigan Pals job was I referred to it as a death march. So they decided to book us in a little club outside of Detroit called the Rock and Roll Farm. Turns out it's a biker bar. Here comes Iggy out in the audience, confronting people only Iggy can do. And he comes up to one guy, and the guy just hauls off and just cold cocks him. Just kaboom.
I don't know how many of you saw us back in 1967 when we first started, you know, but it ain't too easy being the Stooges sometimes, you know? Yeah!
You know, after that gig, nobody had to say anything. It was just like everybody had it. I mean, we couldn't make a living. People were throwing shit at us all the time, and everybody was just tired of it. And so the brothers moved back to Detroit.
Jim never came to me and said it's over. I just figured it out myself. Well, here I am sleeping on the floor. I guess it's over. I was basically homeless. I had a drum set. I sold it and bought a one-way ticket to Detroit. Ended up going over to Mom's house and said, Mom, I'm homeless, I'm broke, I'm hungry.
When the demise of the Stooges occurred, it wasn't really a surprise. And it goes back to that full circle of like, go home, you know, to Mom. After my brothers came home, I remember feeling relieved and glad. It was like, whew, you know, they're safe. That was the main thing, that they came home safe and they were still alive, you know.
That's when I went home to my parents' trailer. I was 24. And the group had a sort of a sputtering demise.
Give me danger, little stranger. Little stranger, and I'll feel you with peace. Give me danger, little stranger, and I'll cure your disease. There's nothing in my dream, just a lovely memory. It's been like the ocean blue.
When I was about 5, we got a TV, and I'd watch Howdy Doody. Buffalo Bob was basically like Timothy Leary for little kids on TV.
How do you feel long about the middle of the morning, Clarabelle? Not so good, little dragged out, huh? Well, then, Clarabelle, what you should have is Ovaltine.
And I remember the sound of the peanut gallery. They had characters like Clarabelle the Clown. You know, and Clarabelle the Clown might do anything. You didn't know what he was going to do. And it just fascinated me. But the big one, it was Soupy Sales. It was called Lunchtime with Soupy. He encouraged kids to write to him, but he said, always, when you write the letter, please, 25 words or less.
Saturday, where'd you learn to sing like that?
At my speech class. That's right, Bobby.
At your speech? Who's your teacher?
And that always stuck with me. And when I wanted to start writing songs for our group, I thought, this is a way to go. Try to make it 25 words, different words or less. I didn't feel like I was Bob Dylan, you know, and I thought, keep it really short and none of it will be the wrong thing.
For no fun, for my babe, for no fun.
Yeah, I saw the movie with my parents, and it felt great that we had the same trailer. Inside, most of the lighting fixtures and part of the furnishings were built in. I had a little bedroom. It was maybe 4 or 5 feet wide by about 9 feet long. It's room for a little pallet and a little mini desk. So the only place I could set up my drums was in the living room, all weekend long. And every night after school, my drum set took up the entire living room. I had a lot of energy. I'd beat for hours. beat, bomb, 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 and the whole place is shaking. And they never complained, but what they finally did do was, after about a year of that, they just gave me the master bedroom. At the time I thought, wow, this is great, but now I realize also it was probably a comparable lesser of two tortures. And they moved a standard sized bed into the small room, no desk, just enough so they could get in and out of bed. And I had a single bed and my drum set set up all the time in the master bedroom. I was so lucky to live at close quarters in a simple environment with my parents. I got to know my parents. That's a real treasure. I remember dumping my Tinker toys and my Lincoln logs when I was a little boy and picking up the wood bits. I would make a drum out of the cylinder and then beat on it. And then when I was in 4th grade, they took us to the River Rouge assembly plant of the Ford Motor Company, and they had a machine that engineered a controlled drop of a piece of metal onto a stamping plate, and every time that thing hit the stamping plate, it made this racket, this a mega clang, and I liked the mega clang. High school band, the Iguanas. We got a job playing full-time at a teen club, a place called the Ponytail. I kept scheming, thinking of things to get more attention, and so I thought, what if I played on the biggest drum riser that anybody has ever had? I was about 16 feet up in the air, all by myself, you know, and the band down there crumbling. A loser in the biz named Chuck approached me and he said, well, I think you guys are pretty good. I'd like to be your manager and I'll help you promote your own gigs. So we rented a pier for one night to throw our own concert. And we had a huge turnout, a huge success. Until halfway through, the floor started to give. Nobody got hurt, but basically we broke the pier. That was the end of the self-promotion. I was the Iguanas during high school and straight out of high school, then a semester in college. Then I dropped out of college and was looking for somebody to give me a job, and the prime movers were these school dropout older guys. They knew about all sorts of blues music. Butterfield's band came through town. The prime movers tried to establish a connection to see if our groups could get some work through them. I asked Jerome Arnold, the bass player in Butterfield at the time, if he had any tips for me on my playing, and he said, when you play it like you mean it. I was getting fairly good, and at some point I lost respect for or faith in the group, and I thought it wasn't really itself. So I decided to go where the real people were doing the real deal. Different, not like white America. I sat in with a couple of guys and actually got paid $10 a couple of times to do very unimportant gigs. Once with a guy named Johnny Young and once with Big Walter Horton, when they had to go out and play for white people. And it was a thrill for me, and I learned a lot. And it was more relaxed, and you ought to have a good time, and the music was very definite. I saw a little glimpse of a deeper life of people who in their adulthood had not lost their childhood. I smoked a big joint one day by the river and realized that I was not black. I thought I would like to do for our generation what the good black players that I loved were doing for theirs. Eventually, I just got tired of looking at somebody's butt all the time. that's your curse. The trim, look at it. The best butt I ever played, the two best butts I ever played behind were Abdul Fakir in the Four Tops. He was the four top that would unify the other in their dance steps. He was like a large bird. And the other one was Mary Weiss from the Shangri-Las. Wonderful body and face. Delicious, creamy, female dream thing. I realized drumming wasn't what I wanted to do, so I decided to go back to Ann Arbor. But I needed a ride home. So I called Ron, and somehow Scott Richardson had a car, and I did talk Ron into working with me. Ron Ashton was a musician. He was one of the few people that had longer hair than me. He was playing bass occasionally with a band called The Chosen Few, and really liked the style on bass. I met his brother Scott later when I was working at Discount Records. Across the street, there was a drugstore called Marshall's, and Scott and a couple of guys hung out inside this drugstore doing nothing. One young tough and his friends. Scott looked like Elvis. Good-looking, athletic-looking, indirect, uncommunicative kid. Scott left school after the 9th grade. I think he put it to somebody, and that was that. He immediately began pestering me for about a year to teach him something on the drums.
I would ask you, do you double stroke on your triplets? You know, I would think up things to ask you, just to talk to
get it going. So I taught him like 4 or 5 beats, mostly Stax, Volton, Bo Diddley stuff.
My name's Scotty Ashton. I go to Garfield School. I'm 8.5 years old. My name is Ronnie Ashton. I'm 9 years old. I go to Garfield School.
They lost their dad when I think Ron was 14. Their father had been a fighter pilot in the war and had stayed in the military shortly after the war. It was something we all had in common.
2, 1, 0. Dive!
My dad was a World War II veteran. On his travels, he would buy a little something, like a dagger or a medal, and then I got interested in it, and we started collecting. And that was like a father and son. We found something to bond with. It had nothing to do with politics or what it stood for. That's pretty oddball that you're buying your 8-year-old son Nazi stuff.
My name is Kathy Ashton. I go to Garfield School. I'm in 2nd grade. That's all, folks.
I was standing on our porch and noticed this guy walking into the neighborhood with long hair. And so I said to Scotty, why don't you flag him down and see who he is, you know? And he whistled down Dave Alexander, who it turned out to be. And so Scotty met him, then Ronnie ended up meeting with him, and they were the ones that gravitated more together because of the commonality of their interest in the British music.
Ron cut his senior year in school. Dave sold his motorcycle and flew to England, and they saw the Who play. They went to the Marquee Club in London, and they stayed till that money ran out.
And that's what really set me on the path. Because when I came back, I tried to go back to school, and just really didn't fit in. In Ann Arbor, it was still frat boys, there's not a lot of us. And my counselor even said, well, why don't you just take the rest of the year off and try to come back next year? And I'm going, yeah, okay. But then going back next year, forget it.
Next year, you can plan for higher success, Bill.
Yes. Thanks, Miss Evans. Plan for higher success.
Tape is rolling anytime you're ready.
They had the concept of a band called the Dirty Shames, and it was basically something they would tell people when they met people at a party or something. Yeah, we got a band called the Dirty Shames. There was a period when the Stooges resembled the Dirty Shames in that we decided we had a band. We told people we had a band, but we hadn't really done any playing. At one point, there was a trip we made to New York, and we met some attractive girls, teenagers, younger than us, who said they had a band. And we drove to Princeton, New Jersey to see these girls play in a basement, and they were just lived with their parents. And they were very, very good. And they were much better than us. At that point, we were shaved. We were going to try a series of rehearsals at Ron and Scott's house. It was Ron who let me know, look, I got to feel good when I play. It's a weed thing. That's when I'm in the mood. I found a guy who said he would sell me an entire marijuana plant. So he brought it to my parents' trailer. He had it in his hand, this thing, almost 4 feet of it. The roots still had dirt on them. I'd seen marijuana. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. Are you sure this is? He said, yeah. He said, but you got to cure it. There was a communal laundry at the trailer park. I put a couple quarters in the dryer and started it up. And I sat there, and it started to stink. Oh no, what's that? I was really scared, but nobody came. I went and buried the whole bag of marijuana. When I wanted to rehearse, I'd dig it up and catch a 45-minute bus. It would be about noon. Usually I could get Ron up anywhere from 5 minutes to a half hour, depending on what I had to do, throw rocks, hose, and with luck, we'd actually all get down in the basement 2:30 at the earliest. But more often or not, their mother would come home just after 3.
I'm home, now shut up that racket. I was in peace, and Osterberg's a mental.
I was in Ann Arbor and never saw those riots of '67, but the way I thought, must be abandoned houses all over Detroit where we can live for free now. So I heard about one, and I went to Detroit with a tab of mescaline and a shovel, and dropped the mescaline and went in that house. I told Ron and Scott, I'm going to make a house, prepare a house where we can live.
What are you building? It's our house. Can't you tell? Yes, but you haven't finished it.
I didn't know from roofing and plumbing, and I didn't know from that shit, you know? But I tried.
This is where we hung out for the first time and started being a group of people that were going to be a band. Any time of day or night, you have an idea, get together, talk about it, play it out, work on songs.
In one of our early houses, where we never accomplished making any music, we had no discipline, the cops kept shutting us down. We were real communists. We were not political at all, but we were true communists. We lived in a communal house. We ate the same food at the same time. We practically shared all money pretty equally. When we began to write songs, happily, since we were too ignorant to realize that there was intellectual property, we shared authorship. Michigan was a key crossroads between San Francisco and New York. And it was where everybody stopped on the way if they were going to bother to stop at all in the flyover country. It was Ann Arbor. I had actually heard a little bit or read a little bit either by or about these people. I had everything, every sort of record in the record store. I was the stooge who knew who John Cage was, or knew Sun Ra, Carl Orr, Adventures, Pharoah Sanders, Wailers, Dwayne Eddy, Link Wray, Velvet Underground, A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. We role-played a lot and listened to a lot of music. And one thing we would do is get really stoned on either marijuana or LSD, turn off all the lights, and we'd put on Harry Partch. all these sounds. Harry Partch was huge for me. You know, it's the idea that he hoboed, he bohemed, he created his own instruments.
I like to think of what I'm doing as visual and corporeal, and I want the instruments on stage, and I want them to be beautiful. I also want the musicians to be an active part, a very active part in the whole production.
I was making instruments while we played primitive riffs. We'd find an extremely simple theme and play it over and over, and then take a rest and play another one. Scott had in the basement my old set of drums, and then he also had the big thing with oil drums. He was beating on oil drums with mallets. Ron had his bass and an amp.
Just a little feeling come over you, just kind of go with this great sound that we're making. And sometimes something would pop in my head. Sometimes to get a sound, I would just hammer on my guitar.
I had this lap steel and I just tuned every string to the same note, to the E. It sounded like an airplane taking off. We had a blender around. And the Gymmophone, it was a cone. It had an opening about 4 inches or 5 inches across at the top. As soon as you drop the mic into the opening, you'll get, you lower it a little bit and it'll just go, and it even goes down octaves until you get, Dave, he operated some of these instruments. One of the first things I used to love to do with a mic, I would inhale, and you listen to an asthma attack. That's good freeform music. One night, we'd been up all night on LSD. We were all in Ron's room, and I said, what about a name for our band? Ron just said, well, let's just call it the Stooges, because we don't do anything wrong, but everybody's picking on us. But we'll be the Psychedelic Stooges.
Here's a bunch of guys that couldn't even play, and they're playing the Grande Ballroom, and the audience is just mesmerized. You know, Iggy's in whiteface, playing his vacuum cleaner.
I wore whiteface, and I had an aluminum afro wig. I was wearing a maternity smock, and then events would happen. Like we would throw things and make a noise. I would throw a pie. I actually tried to get the group to work out a cover song. What's simple enough for the group to play, simple enough for me to sing, and has a good beat? And this was a terrible experiment, but we tried She Cried by Jay and the Americans. And when I told her I didn't love her anymore, she cried. That was as far as we could ever get.
It sounded great. I'd do it right now.
There was a particular rehearsal where I just handed Ron a guitar and I just said, you do it. I'm not that good at the music part. And Dave moved over on bass. Our manager came home and I improvised an angry song and began, again, I had no way to express my anger to this guy who I never liked so much. I just started jumping up and down, like kind of the way chimps or baboons do before they're gonna fight, like that. And as soon as I started doing that, up went the Ashtons.
All night till the flow, everywhere. I feel all right. I feel all right.
That was the first time I ever saw those two guys powerfully motivated by something that wasn't an imitation of somebody else, something that was their own. In the Ashtons, I found Primitive Man.
Brothers and sisters, it's time to get down with it. Brothers, it's time to testify, and I want to know, are you ready to testify? Are you ready? I give you a testimonial. Testify!
Fred Smith was dating Kathy Ashton. Scott and I and Ron went with Kathy to see the MC5 when they were still a cover band. A lot of attitude. They had looked down. They were doing British influenced R&B, rock and soul. I remember a night when the three of us drove into Detroit to see if we could talk about getting some opening slots. And they had a practice space with a big, thick door. And Scott and Ron and I stood there in freezing cold, listening through the door to kick out the jams. Coming through like... Really simple. And then, wow, so powerful. We should get some of that. And we would play with them for nothing in church basements, youth centers, and we would open some of their shows at the ballroom. We joined their circus in many ways. The Five were bigger time commies than we were. The big poobah of the area was John Sinclair.
Talking about soul in the culture by any means necessary, including rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets. We believe that the general social structure, the Western world is crumbling, and that now is time to increase the assault on this culture. And
under Sinclair's cloud of mega organization began to branch into, first there was the MC5 Commune, and then there was Trans-Love Energies. And then they were becoming more political, and they wanted to be like Black Panthers, and they started this White Panther Party, which was just, honestly, it was just ridiculous. We tried to avoid that. We tried to avoid everything. I guess that was why you kept hearing the word nihilist about us. But finally, at one point, John put his foot down, and he wanted us to accompany the Five to play at the Democratic Convention in Chicago in '68 that culminated in bloody rioting.
Well, I'm sitting all alone.
And I didn't want to. There was a, you're either with us or against us moment there, and I wasn't going for it. I still didn't say anything. I started somersaulting around the room. That was my reaction. I couldn't think of it. I don't know. I don't know why, but it just, I couldn't say no. I wasn't going to say yes. So finally, he just left the room. I remember that moment. That wasn't who we were, and that would have come out. Not long after that, we were playing in the Student Union in Michigan when a record scout was coming to see them. It was recommended by Wayne Kramer, you should check out our little brother band.
This was Wayne Kramer. I'll never forget this. He said, you know, you like us, but I think if you like us, we have a little brother band, and you will really like them. He was prescient, and I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. It was Iggy and the Stooges. I said, well, when can I see them? He said, they're playing this afternoon on the campus at the University of Michigan. I went across the street and up the stairs and heard this incredible music just booming in the hallways. This is so great. And I was pulled by the music. And people asked me, when did you first see Iggy? But I didn't. I heard them before I saw him. saw Iggy, he was the front man. I thought it's just perfection.
We used to get those big amps cranking and this room just rang. It was like the sound just bounced. You can hear from this. Just imagine Marshall Stacks at 10. This is where we were discovered by Danny Fields. We got done playing. It's the same stage. Place was packed. You know, imagine this was late 60s, like 1968. We was PR for Elektra Records. So we get off stage, and he goes, how would you guys like to be stars? Oh, yeah, right, sure. Throw this guy out. And he was serious.
I'm just going to call president of Elektra Records. So I said I just saw two great bands. The one band is really popular around here. They have a following. They played to 2,000-3,000 people. And the other band is a little early stages of development. Jack just said, see if the big band will take 20,000 and the little band will take 5. Both bands signed on that day. It was the weekend of September 22nd, 1968.
Showbiz is not a friendly place. And I gotta say, of all the people that ever extended a hand to our group, the MC5 were probably the most genuine about it. As soon as we got signed, we started feeling more professional. I think we realized we didn't need to be the psychedelic Stooges. Just be the Stooges. So Ron actually called up Bo Howard to see if it would be okay. Finest hour, when he came up over the next months with 2 great riffs. I Want to Be Your Dog and No Fun. So for a while, we just went out and played it, and I remember on both that one and No Fun, the members of the MC5 raising an eyebrow and going, you got a good riff there. We loved it. The whole group loved New York. There were things in that environment that didn't really exist for a young person in the Midwest.
In my room, I want you here.
I'd been listening to a Velvet's record. It's just very, very good. And it was simple. And the simplicity and some of the droning and some of the moods had a big influence on us, you know. So when Dave suggested John Cale, we thought it was perfect for us. That record wouldn't have felt the same if we hadn't brought it to New York and played it for that person. We performed for him. I remember that he wore a big black cape like Z-Man in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. He brought Nico in a few times. It really looked like Morticia and Gomez. Ready? When we recorded the record, they couldn't get a decent band track of the band unless I danced. I would stand in the band room with them, just with no mic or anything, and just dance and jump around and roll around, do whatever I had to do to get a take. The studio, there's a tiny little room above a peep show on Times Square, but it was an R&B studio run by Jerry Ragavoy with tiny little amplifiers. And we came in with our Marshall Stacks, and everybody freaked out. The house engineer started saying, but Jerry Ragavoy does it this way. I don't care about Jerry Ragavoy. We know you don't understand. Cale finally got us to turn our amps to 9. That was the compromise.
You
We have 4 songs: Dog, Fun, 69, and the idea was each song had a song part that lasted about 2 minutes, and then there'd be about 10 minutes of improv on the riff. And when we heard it back taped, I thought, it really sounds great. The first 3 minutes, this is good. And then after the 3 minutes, I started thinking, I don't know if this is really so great to listen to at minute 7 here, but I didn't say anything. And then it took a very sensible record store owner in business, Jack Holtzman. No, I can't put this out. There are not enough songs. And, you know, I knew he was right. Well, we got a lot more songs. Just book us another session.
She, isn't that right? I want some tonight.
Half or more of the songs were written in the Chelsea Hotel the day before we went into the studio. And the song Not Right, we had never played. The first time we'd ever played it, that was it. That was the take.
And it's always
Dave Alexander, he said, why don't we do something with an Om chant? I don't know if it was Ron or me, but one of us melodicized the chant, or they made it Om Shri Ram Ja Ram Ja Ja Ram. If we didn't have that song on that album, we would have had just a bunch of similar rock tracks in the party line.
I hold myself tight.
It did make a statement that we weren't like the other bands.
Dave changed our history. That record, I thought it was myself, that it was a sort of neat, petite, well-organized, good, sharp little poke. And I was real proud of the clarity of the songs. Nico was the most culturally and artistically knowledgeable, beautiful woman that I'd ever met. She was 10 years older than me, and she had an opinion about almost everything that had to do with the arts. And I listened to her. And I began being influenced, probably got a little crazier. She stayed a couple of weeks, I think. They hated having a girl in the house.
And at first, we resented her being there. It's like, good damn it. And they pretty much kept to themselves, so there's no hanging out. And then the worst was bringing her in the practice room. No women or girlfriends in the practice room. She'd sit there,
watch, and she'd critique it. You know, this one is very good. I think she was on the rebound, was maybe from something with Lou Reed, perhaps. So she'd usually get in a dig at Lou whenever she liked something I was doing. She said, you are much better. You are much more talented than Lou.
So we just started hanging out and gave her a break because she was an interesting, good person.
And we went and played that material at the World's Fair Pavilion in Queens, near where the Ramones grew up as an opening act to Joe Cocker. Well, you know, Joe Cocker's singing, You are so beautiful. And everybody's just going nuts. You know, this is it. And then we're like, and just... In the 50s, they figured out how to suck the life out of rock and roll. On the one hand, let's replace Elvis with Fabian, and then also at the same time, we'll run a Perry Como on him. This was happening again. Rock and roll was at the time was being co-opted by a political industrial complex of corrupt performers and evil manager owners who were going to create whatever they thought was the best product for them, whether you want it or not. You shove this down your little throats. They rejected their own country and their own people. It's cultural treason. There was more American Idol, more of the corny talent show suggested to the American audience at that time than people like to admit. It was all, you know, Marrakesh Express.
Would you know we're riding on the Marrakesh Express?
I mean, somebody needs to say, you know, some of the biggest peace love acts of the California 5 years of love were created in meetings, and stuff smells. I say still smells. Across the Mississippi for the first time in 1970 to record Funhouse. And every day around noon, we would all go into the studio and record for the day. Each day was always, this is the day of loose. And that's all we were going to do that day. And there was the day of down on the street, et cetera, and then a couple of days mixing. It was under 2 weeks. We were experimenting after the Stooges with more aggressive music, with more space, a la Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, we hoped. And everything that James Brown was doing with Fred Wesley and Maceo Parker. And I saw Steve playing with his band, the Carnal Kitchen. I thought, oh my God, this guy can really blow a horn.
He had 1970 and Funhouse already written, just waiting for me. And we got to Funhouse, and he said, play like Maceo Parker on acid.
We did some interesting things with space. Things like very minimal drum, 4/4 drum beats, but with syncopation on the top. Double tracking leads sometimes, but with no rhythm guitar. That's not usually done in rock and roll. It's not supposed to be very commercial. Electra Studio was just marvelous. It was just one room. There were no choices. It was intimate, but big enough that you could spread things a little bit. Had a nice throw rug. I was using my own PA stack in there. I didn't want the studio-made sound that the vocals had on the first album.
Would you like a music stand?
Say what?
Would you like a music stand?
No, that's okay. Ron says he needs the bass up again. He turns it up.
We got the red lights. Anytime you're ready.
We were housed in the Tropicana Motel. And Warhol had the door to his room ajar one day. I went in to say hi. He suggested, he said, why don't you do some songs? Just sing the newspaper. Just sing what it says in the newspaper. Well, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but that was his idea. While we stayed there, the suite next to mine was occupied by Ed Sanders, who was writing The Family. I was always interested in new looks, too. There was a pet store catered to dogs called the Bowser Boutique down the street on Santa Monica, and I walked by one day and I saw this red dog collar, and I thought, I would look so cool if I had that dog collar, right? So I bought the dog collar and I started wearing it every day to go to the studio, and Ed Sanders would look at me and he'd say, you don't know what that means, do you? You know, I still don't know what it means, you know, but he was like...
It was cool.
One day I was out for a walk, and I was walking in the opposite direction from the Tropicana. It was on Santa Monica, I think it was the corner of Westmount, and a black caddy came tear-assing down the hill, and he had to slam on the brakes because I was stepping off the curb. I looked at me, I was sure it was John Wayne. God damn it.
I haven't lost my temper in 40 years, but Pilgrim, you caused a lot of trouble this morning. Might have got somebody killed.
And then he swerved around me and sped off in the general direction of Dan Tana's.
And here's the world-famous Whiskey A Go-Go on the Strip, a favorite dancing spot for both the mods and movie stars who want to get it on. Let's drop in and see what's happening tonight.
Oh, look out. It was really a California experience, and then to pay for it, we were bidden to do two nights at the Whiskey, and the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA, and 2 nights in San Francisco at the Fillmore.
Which freaked everybody out. Every time, every place we played.
Nobody ever seen anything like what we did, you know. Upon our return to the Midwest, we were playing larger festivals, larger events, and we were getting pretty good live because the stuff on Funhouse was pretty damn rockin' live.
You better be dancing, baby. I feel bad, I'm a shaking leaf. I feel bad, be dancing.
Festivals that became bigger and where we were starting to get more notice happened in the summer of '70. After we completed Funhouse, and we would generally go out and, as people often do, play that whole work, and we were pretty much ignoring the stuff from the first album. And I remembered, I read a quote from Johnny Ramone once. He went to see us, and apparently there were too many new songs that he didn't know, and he was disgusted.
Since we broke away for our message, Iggy has been in the crowd and out again 3 different times. They seem to be enjoying it, and so does he.
The group was always very aware of the theatrics of the moment, and they never moved, ever. In 40 minutes, the drummer would never look up, and the other 2 might move a foot or 2.
We never knew what would happen, and so in the old days, you know, we just literally, I mean, it could be, we'd be out there, you know, and there's no vocal. You know, the guy's out in the crowd, he's down on the floor somewhere, you know, there's no vocal. So we're still going, you know, so until he starts singing, we don't do anything. And then, you know, eventually he'll climb back up and start singing. And that's, you know, it's all about, you know, working together to make a show.
You know, the way he works a gig, it reminds you that life, big time, is in the moment. Maybe most of it. But the moment is really intense about what's going down. Because, you know, I feel like a short order cook. I got to get everybody's order. Yeah, you want fries? You want Shake? You know, he's going out, and in his mind, he says he's going to the crowd.
So it was important to make contact, I felt, at every show. And we were opening for the Mothers of Invention. And that was the best group, in my estimation, that we'd ever opened for. So near the end of our set, I was not sure we'd really reached across. There were a couple of girls, big ones. They moved up right in front of the stage, and they just were laying there on their backs, making themselves very comfortable, relaxing. And I got to the edge of the stage, and I did what I'd seen little kids do sometimes when they want attention from their parents. I thought, I'm just going to fall forward. They'll catch me. And they moved. And my front teeth, which I've since had repaired, went straight through one of my lips. Sometimes it was eventful. Sometimes it was, listen, I was a guy very young in a rock band and having beautiful summers in the Midwest, so sometimes I'd just go down there and, you know, see some chick and go, hey, what's your number?
You will come to me whenever I call you. And I will enjoy that very much.
I had seen a lot of pictures of the pharaohs and some of their attendants, Egyptian iconography, I guess you'd call it. And it impressed me that the pharaohs seldom wore shirts.
Here in a minute, in of all these announcements, we're gonna have a big ceremony where we're gonna plant the seeds, and then we're gonna light the joint and celebrate.
That particular festival came along at a time when all the different free love, freewheeling, free-roaming social groups in Detroit were all starting to sizzle up in the frying pan of drugs. We all got so stoned. I was in a tent with some wild people, and I took so much of what I thought was coke before the thing that I had amnesia, accompanied by a vertical malfunction with my vision, like the sort of thing that used to happen in televisions of that era when the picture would keep flipping over and over. Couldn't remember who I was, and then finally I remembered there was something I had to do. He just went all the way out that night.
He got extremely drunk before the show, and he couldn't play the songs. One of the road crew went up and turned his volume all the way off on his amp, and he kept playing. He didn't even realize that his amp wasn't on.
We had a good billing. Danny had brought important people from New York to see us. We were on the same bill with Rod Stewart and the Faces. We wanted to do well. We got out there's no bass. So I was extra aggressive. I did try to get to the fence. I was prevented. There was an actual trench dug, and there were horse police. And so I started calling, come on, you know, tear that fence. I think I mentioned tear the fence down.
Lead Stooges freaked out.
I think the fence took a couple hits.
Jumped over the fence, and we lost power on the amp.
I don't remember being arrested. I remember just sitting after the gig really like still whacked out and watching Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart drinking Battus to get ready for their show. That was their intoxicant of choice.
Iggy fired him, but not really, because Dave wanted to be let go. Yeah, I felt bad, but I also felt there's no sense in having someone in the band that that's not serious, who doesn't really want to be in the band. And we remained friends after. His parents called me up, said he was in the hospital. What it was an inflamed pancreas, which he could have survived. But they had an IV in him, and he wanted it out, and he wanted to go home, and he wanted a beer. So they sedated him to a point to where he was unconscious, and when he was unconscious, he got pneumonia, and the pneumonia killed him. He'd recorded 2 albums. He became to be in a famous rock and roll band. He had accomplished what he wanted to do. He was ready to go.
Do you feel it? Said, do you feel it when you touch me? And do you feel it when you touch me? There's a fire. There's a fire. That's such a
I'd been using psychedelics. They were probably cut with a lot of speed.
God, no! No, no, no!
I began to have problems controlling my nerves.
Get me out of this terrible place!
That was about the time that one guy who lived in our house, a guy named John Adams, didn't have much to do in his life,
Okay, here.
decided he wanted to take up an old heroin addiction.
What's H? That's a lot.
And I fell into that, as did other members of the group.
Everything just decayed. And to see those guys, just to see everyone hit rock bottom, to see your whole world crumble when it's not really your fault. And I never did it and never wanted to.
Aside from us just being flat out unreliable, we had Scotty Ashton was driving the equipment truck one day, and so like a bridge with whatever 10 feet or 11 feet clearance, and the truck's 12 feet, you know?
That's the metaphor of the early Stooges. That's it. The van's destroyed. The instruments that they rented are destroyed. The bridge is destroyed. They were victims of their own lack of professionalism.
Down on the street where the faces shine.
But they're also the victims of other forces that we could call anti-art. The Stooges recorded Funhouse. So we're at the point where Elektra has to decide whether or not to pick up the option for a third album. William S. Harvey and I went out to Ann Arbor, went to Stooge Hall, and they played what were the songs that were going to be their new songs. And I just thought, yes, the music is what I loved, and there's more of it. Like, accelerating from where they started. They were better, but it made no difference to them. And got into our rental car, went back to the hotel. We got in the elevator, and so, Bill, what'd you think? And he said, I didn't hear a thing. Got out of the elevator door closed. I called him up and I said, you're being dropped. I didn't hear a thing. That says it all. From day one, they had the world's greatest band sitting there. They didn't hear a thing. And that's kind of what the world said.
I don't think they formally dropped to me, but they said, look, here's an Nikon camera as a gift. Go away for a while. And so I scurried off to clean up and shut down the band for a while. My parents were very friendly with a pharmacist who completely illegally, without a prescription, ordered a bottle of liquid methadone for my exclusive daily use. It was a couple of miles from our trailer on the edge of Ann Arbor, and I would usually walk in the morning over there to take a small dose that he would personally give me from this family pharmacist. I got to the point I could go a few days without anything. And that was when I went to New York.
Iggy and I were sitting on my bed, we'd fallen asleep, some black and white Western, and Lisa called me, and she said, oh, is Iggy with you? I said, oh, yeah. She said, well, I'm with David Bowie. We're at Max's. He really wants to meet Iggy.
I went down there and met this manager, Tony DeFries. I met David, who was cool. They were going back to England. I went back to Detroit, and there was an understanding that at a later date, they would arrange for me to go to London to make some sort of a recording. They had somehow, in some way, signed me to something, and using that in turn, signed a deal whereby they got some money from Columbia for my services. Like that chick Pebbles that signed up TLC, or Lou Pearlman with the boy band NSYNC. It was one of those contracts. It was insane work demands, ridiculous splits of money. I didn't really understand who owned what, with whom I was signed. I was in the big bad world now. I wasn't a teenage communist anymore. This fella, Tony DeFries, what I thought was going to be an effective, and was an effective, flamboyant theatrical management style based on Colonel Tom Parker, with the big cigar, the big afro hair, and a great big mink coat. But in the interim, I decided I wanted to retain my Detroit identity, and told them in advance, you got to bring James Williamson with me.
I guess he was trying to capture the attitude that I had, which I did have quite a bit of attitude when I first started out. You know, I didn't really have any framework for anything. I was, not even 20 years old yet, and I didn't have any skills, and so all I could do was play the guitar. I went from living on my sister's couch, literally, to getting a phone call from Ig and saying, tomorrow we have a plane ticket for you and you're going to London, right? And so I got my guitar and I left. And my sister didn't even know where I was. My girlfriend called and she goes, well, I don't know where he is. And the girl goes, well, is his guitar there? And she said, no. And he goes, all right, he's gone.
So James and I got to Heathrow, and cops took one look at us and thought, undesirable, no money. What are you doing? What do you mean you think you're not going anywhere? You're going into this holding tank, and it took us a while to contact DeFries on the phone, and he came down and signed for us. I don't think he ever really wanted us. I think David Bowie was interested in working with American artists who he admired at the time. I also think there was a bit of an American invasion planned. Ultimately, they were hoping to probably have us produced by David Bowie, who had a parallel career in production. And he was producing Lou Reed's album around the same time. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I would have been polite about the backup musicians, but the names bandied about were people who'd already been in the Pink Fairies. When I investigated the Pink Fairies, it sort of looked to me like an amalgam of the ideas that had already been thrashed out by the MC5 and Alice Cooper. It wasn't right for us, I thought. I talked them into bringing 2 more Stooges over from America. Had a vision, and we started rehearsing in earnest in a filthy basement and started getting tight. The songwriting wasn't really there yet, but the grooves, the force was. Some of the songs we had already written and brought in at that time were I Gotta Write, Give Me Some Skin, Tight Pants, which later showed up as Shake Appeal on Raw Power. We did some demo sessions at a little 8-track called R.G. Jones in Wimbledon, and those were good demo sessions. Then later, we did a little more formal session in Olympic Studios with Keith Harwood, who was a Stones engineer at that time. And that's the recording of I Gotta Write that's become so popular since. It's fast as lightning and kicks like a mule.
Our best effort to make hit records. Basically, we wanted to make a good record, but the thing about us is that we're so delusional about what is popular, because all we really care about is what we like.
Sometime, I don't know if it was late fall, somebody knows. we had written the second batch of material that was going to be Raw Power.
And eventually, they just all got busy with Bowie, and it left us in the studio because we owed a record to CBS. And that's where Raw Power came out of. And we really, I've said this before, we were just left without any adult supervision. I mean, we just did our thing.
Cheetah with a hat full of napalm. I'm a runaway son of the nuclear A-bomb. I am the world's forgotten boy, the one who searches and destroys.
As a guitarist, James fills the space as if somebody's just let a drug dog into your house, and it's big. And he finds every corner of a musical premise and of a piece of space and time and fills it up with detail. It's a very detailed approach, and it's really hard to find a space to say something that he hasn't thought of or occupied. And so Ron plays a sort of a nimble bass style on it. It really, really helps lift James. My vocals, I had to go way up high. I'm an octave above Funhouse to find a space that James isn't occupying. Scott solved the problem by just beating the living shit out of his drums.
The bass player and the drummer are the most important thing in the band other than the songs. You know, when those guys were together, they were just like this unit, you know, and it just was rock solid. It was so good. It was really, really good. And that's what, well, unfortunately on Raw Power, you don't actually hear the bass that much, but it was there. It was good.
The band from late 1971, when we were signed with the main man, to early 72, or whenever we went to London and began working with them, to early 73, when they publicly dropped us, but privately told me that I was suspended for moral turpitude and embarrassing their company, they consistently refused to allow us to play a gig. And we were popular enough that we could have gone out and earned most of our bacon. They wouldn't let us play. The situation brought out our old weaknesses, and we were told that we were going to go live in Hollywood in this firm, Main Man House there. And it was oil and water. James Williamson behaved badly. Iggy Pop behaved badly. Scott Ashton just looked at the floor and let it roll. Ron Ashton was embittered and powerless and threw up his hands, and the group drifted into drugs. Again, this embarrassed these people. DeFreeze came through town one day in a limo. I think he was going to talk to me about something they could do with me that didn't involve these guys, that would put a positive spin on his investment with me. And he got me into his limo and he said, James, I want to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take you to New York, to Broadway, and you're going to be Peter Pan.
If I'm pleased with myself, I have every good reason to be.
And I, with deep sincerity, and I mean this, I said, no, Tony. I've got to be Manson. We've got to make a movie. He dropped me off, and it was just a couple days after that that the rest of us got thrown out of the house.
The brothers moved back to Detroit. Later on, Iggy and I decided we would give it another whirl. And so we created what later became Kill City. We lucked out. We had a friend, Jimmy Webb. He had a studio in his house. It was funny. I mean, you know, you'd have guys like Art Garfunkel coming into the session, you know, listening to playbacks, and then they would just leave, you know, and without any takers for the album, we just called it quits. Jim went off with Bowie to Europe. And I went to work for a recording studio, but I quickly realized that there's only one thing worse than playing in a band you don't like, and that's recording 5 or 10 bands every day that you can't stand. So I really wasn't very cut out for that, but I did learn a lot, and it stimulated an interest in electronics. And at that time, it was the very, very beginning of the personal computers. And so I went off and I learned how to do all that stuff. I'll tell you, when I was studying engineering, to go from the Stooges to calculus was a huge existential gap. So I went and moved to the Silicon Valley and started working in the electronics industry. And I've been there ever since. I mean, that's been a 27-year career.
After the Stooges collapsed, Ron first joined New Order, and then destroy all monsters with Niagara.
I played 5 years in the Sonic Rendezvous Band, which is Fred Smith, and he married Patti Smith, and once he did, that was the end of the band. Went on another 5 years playing with Scott Morgan without Fred, making $30, $40 a night. 3 sets a night. I'd have day jobs, warehousing, landscaping. For 2 years, I drove a taxi cab. Just crummy jobs.
I think that the Stooges reinvented music as we know it. If I say that Stooges music is .0, the Ramones were a great love of mine. After that, knew each other, not because they liked each other, because they were the only 4 people at their school who liked the Stooges.
Do you feel you've influenced anybody in the...
I think I helped wipe out the 60s.
You'll get one number and one number only, because I'm a lazy bastard. This is no fun.
It's Dionysic, if you know the difference between Dionysic and Apollonian art.
There was a movie. Velvet Goldmine's one of the dudes is a compositor gig, and they wanted like some dynamic music coming from somebody called the Rats. They put Steve Shelley out because he's from Midland, Michigan, to go with Ronnie, and he writes songs. And he comes to New York, and we get to record with him, yeah. Here I got to sit across, and there's two, you know, there's the guy doing the TVI. We could see his hands and play along. It was a trip. I got sick when I was 42 and it almost killed me, this infection. They had to put tubes in me, and I couldn't work bass. So it was the first time I stopped since I was 13. And when I came back, I was all atrophied and really lame. I thought you were not supposed to lose that kind of stuff. So I panicked and started doing Stooges songs to get strong. And I put together some bands just to do this. There's not a lot of chord changes, but it's a lot about the feel. So little doll, little doll, little doll, little doll. On the West Coast, I did one with Perk and Peter from Porno, from Pyro. And on the East, I did it with Jay and Murph from Dinosaur. Well, Jay gets his solo album, and he asked me to tour. He says, man, it's hard for me to sing every song every night, so why don't you do some Stooges like we did with those gigs? And when we come through Ann Arbor, he says, you know Ronnie, because of the, now I got his phone number. I call him and he comes to the Blind Pig, and he jams Stooges with us. So Jay says, come on tour. First 2/3 will be mine, and then the last third we'll do Stooges. Then 2002 comes, and Thurston is curating an all-tomorrow party at UCLA, and he says, why don't we get Scotty, you know? He was living in his truck, and so rent him a drum set, and he comes. So me and Jay are playing with both Ashton brothers, and we do some gigs in Europe. And that's where I think Ig heard about it.
It was time for me to record again, and I'd run out of things to say. My record label had run out of patience with my middling sales on the last couple of albums. To preempt being produced, which was the kiss of death to me, I offered to do a guest star album. I started listing everybody I thought of who was cool, and then I realized none of them were any as cool as the Stooges. Sometimes just a hop or two in front of me playing with Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr.
I got a phone call one day from Ron Ashton, and he was saying, well, we're playing this thing with Jay Mascis.
Jay Mascis pulled the whole thing together.
Jay Mascis.
Then we did the Ashton Mascis Watt thing, which Jim caught ear of, because people wanted to hear those songs. So we were playing the old Stooges songs and getting good reviews. So that sparked Jim to want to get the band back together.
I gave Ron a call. I still knew the phone number was the same at his home from 1966. And he said, yeah, I'll do it.
I remember going to my mom's house. Ronnie was there. And my mom's, you know, I walk in and she's going, guess who just called? And I'm like, she goes, Iggy. And she was so excited, you know, because she was like, thought it was the coolest thing that Iggy called and the band's getting back together.
So in a weird way, it was the Cats, Don Fleming and Jimbo Dunbar, who asked Ronnie, I mean, this is my guess, to do that Velvet Goldmine. That kind of started the whole ball rolling. And then that Sickness in a weird way, and Jay saying, come on aboard. Yeah, somehow, you know, I don't know exactly, but I think this was the dynamic that led to the 2003 Coachella.
Before we had left the studio, we got a call from Coachella. They offered us a show, to be honest, at what would be a good price for an Iggy Pop show. But if I was going to work with the Stooges, we're communists. We split all the money. So I had, only way I could do it was say, well, you'd have to give us 3 times that. I thought they'd go away, and they came back and said, okay.
When the band got back together, I was so happy. It was a dream come true. just, oh my God, finally, I'm back with the band.
I could tell that they really enjoyed playing with each other. I could really tell that they were glad to be doing this, even with all those years in between.
I'm so messed up, I want you here. In my room, I want you here.
Certain parts of history have repeated themselves, both in the history of this reunification of our group, which I prefer to call it that rather than a reunion. And one thing that happened was, we did a substantial period with Ron doing the guitar.
Now I wanna be your dog. Well, come on.
The last time I saw him was after the show. I opened the door, and he and Scotty were sitting in profile at the end of the room, and they were surrounded by young Slovenian musicians. So I just saw that they were busy and split. I last saw him in profile. He popped up in my dreams a few times since then, and he never spoke or looked at me. It was always sort of more something like, the guy in The Third Man or the guy in The French Connection that's always walking by, and you can't quite catch him. He was a lot like that. When he passed away, it coincided with James's retirement as a Sony executive, and he wanted to rock, and I was sure that there was nothing else meaningful that the group could do other than do some things with him, doing his material, and having just finally done the right thing 35 years later with Ron's material, to do the same thing for his and complete the job.
Iggy's talking to me about, well, you want to play guitar? And I'm going, well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't played guitar in 30 years. So, but I felt like that, and this is the truth, I felt like that these guys were, they're my buddies. I mean, I know these guys from my 20s. And so they needed me, to do this. And I felt like I needed to step up and do it. I really had no intention, idea, or wildest dream that I would be playing, guitar again for the Stooges. I mean, it was really the furthest thing from my mind.
They were a group of the slightly more popular, slightly more physically aggressive guys in my class. And there were about 4 or 5 of them at the time. I had been to 1 or 2 of their homes. Used to eat French fries with them across the street from school. So one of them had a car his dad had given him. They came out, they did 3 things. One of them said, yeah, look, his dad drives a Cadillac and he lives in a trailer. Car's bigger than his house. A few of them got together. Let's see if it shakes. And they started pushing it and trying to shake the trailer on its foundations, which it would not. But you could feel it. I wanted to be friends with these guys, and I admired certain things about them. One of them jumped in the bathtub and made some sort of remark about the size of the bathroom. Yeah, ever since I've been out to get them. Ever since, I'll bury those guys.
Oh, we three here are the surviving Stooges. Ron and Dave would have gotten a big kick out of this, and Ron was pissed off that it didn't happen while he was alive. I don't know how he feels about it now. He's probably sitting up there in heaven having martinis with Brian Jones, trying to flick ashes on our head. Music is life, and life is not a business. Ron Ashton knew this, and Ron was cool. The MC5 are cool. My friend Danny, who discovered the band, is cool. And Nina, my beautiful wife, you're cool. All the poor people who actually started rock and roll music are cool. Thank you, Stooge fans. There may be 3 of you up there, and I'll bet there's a couple in the fancy seats. So thanks for being so cool.
I don't want to belong to the glam people. I don't want to belong to the hip-hop people. I don't want to belong to any of it. I don't want to belong to the TV people, alternative people, none of it. I don't want to be a punk. I just want to be.